Recording in progress.
It is 7:01 PM, and I'm calling the November 21st, 2023 meeting of the Hamilton Planning Board to order. We have an extensive agenda this evening, so I'm hoping to run a tight ship this evening, so we'll get started. So, Planning Board members, when I call your name, would you please indicate that you're present? Pat Norton?
Pat Norton, hold on, I think.
Oh, must be you.
Something wrong, we got not ready for that.
I just got it.
Yeah.
I'll turn it off, turn mine off, see if that.
Here.
Jonathan Poor, present.
Bill Wheaton?
Bill Wheaton, present.
Emil Dahlquist?
Emil Dahlquist, present.
Rick Mitchell?
Present.
Matt Hamel?
Present.
And Marnie Crouch present, and I note for the record that Beth Herr is not present. So the first item on our agenda is an A&R approval, approval not required request. So in accordance with Mass General Law, Chapter 41, Section 81, the applicant, 250 Cutler Road LLC, is seeking a Form A&R endorsement from the Planning Board for multiple parcels at 250 Cutler Road. And that would be Assessor's Map 30, Lot 2. And the applicant intends to divide the existing 293 square foot lot, that's approximate, into 3 parcels, lots A, B, and C. And the property is in the RA zoning district. So is the applicant here?
Yeah, present.
Oh, yes, please go to the podium and state your name and your address.
Yeah, Chris Vance, 22 Boardman Lane, Hamilton. So yeah, we're seeking A&R approval. As Marnie had stated, we are taking 250 Cutler Road, which is a 2,930,135 square foot lot. We're going to be dividing it into Lot A, B, and C, as you can see on the A&R plan. I'm not sure if everyone has a copy in front of them. There is an existing house which would be remaining on Lot C, and Lot C will be approximately 87,309 square feet. Lot B, which is going to be the middle lot, is going to be 80,461 square feet. And Lot A, which is the largest lot, is going to be 125,365 square feet. All the lots meet the 175 foot lot frontage. We also meet the 157.5 diameter buildable circle. We do propose to have a shared driveway using existing curb cut off of Cutler Road, which would serve for Lot A, B, and C.
Do any planning board members have any questions about the applicant's proposal? And Patrick, you can confirm that all the required frontages are accurate and whatnot?
That's all accurate. The lots meet the requirement. The frontage is adequate. They have access, and as I said, they have frontage. Those being the 2 elements of Mass General Law they have to satisfy.
I note that there are horse trails in that vicinity. Do you know whether there are any easements on the property, or whether there are existing trails on the property? And if you do know, whether you intend to retain them?
Yeah, I don't believe there are any existing trails. We do abut the Harvard Forest, which does
Right.
have trails, and also across the street is Appleton Farms. But there are no evidence of existing horse trails on the property.
Right, I just asked that question because I know the Essex County Trail Association is very much interested in preserving trail access when there are easements. So if there had been any, I would have asked you to inform Carol Lloyd of that fact. But thank you for that answer. And no one else has any requests, questions?
Just out of curiosity, what are you planning on doing with these lots?
So the 2 lots that don't have an existing house, we plan on building 2 new homes.
Okay. Right next, one of them right next to the train line.
I mean, it will be along, yeah, that property does run along the train line, yeah, the commuter rail.
You're doing special windows.
Special windows, fencing, yes.
So with that said, if there are no further questions or from the board, I will entertain a motion to approve the A&R request.
I make a motion to approve the A&R request for Cutler Road.
Do I have a second?
Second.
So when I call your name, would you please indicate whether you approve of the motion? Pat Norton,
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Her, and I know for the record that you're now present. Do you approve the
Yeah,
A&R
aye.
request? Rick Mitchell
Yeah, aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye. So I think we'll have to sign the map before we leave, so.
Okay.
Congratulations.
All right, thank you, appreciate it.
The next item on our agenda is a presentation from representatives of Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary with respect to their proposed revisions to the Planning Board's draft Browns Hill Overlay District. And I will state at the outset that my intention here is for the seminary to present its proposed revisions to the document and if possible, indicate the reasons why the changes have been made. And I will also state at this time, it is not my intention to engage in any discussion with respect to these proposed revisions, and I would ask planning board members to refrain from asking any questions. My intention is for the planning board members to write down their questions, but at a subsequent meeting, I intend to create a framework so that the planning board can analyze the different revisions to this document in a very organized, in a very methodical fashion. And I think if we were to just interject with questions, we would not get a real sense of where the planning board stands with respect to the various changes to the document. So unless I hear any objection from planning board members, that is how I intend to proceed. So you will have the floor uninterrupted.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I take it what you'd like is an overview for some of the major principles that we've pointed out, and not necessarily a line-by-line review of each red line that we've provided to the board?
Well, I would like to, you know, what I determined was the red lines changes were extensive, and there were, in fact, substantive revisions to the document. So
Sure.
you could focus on the substantive changes.
Sure.
But there were a number of them. I did
Right.
note some seemed to be stylistic, but I really do want to get to the meat of what you are proposing to change in the document.
Sure, sure. So, well, thank you again, Madam Chair, members of the board. So we're confident about the approach here that we're doing. I think it's been a good one thus far in terms of bringing us to this point. We're glad for the opportunity now to provide our response that we haven't had a chance to do up until this time. So as you know, we've provided to the board a red line version. We did try to keep the red lines as few as possible, understanding both the effort that's been put into it and also the time crunch that we're under, but also because we just want to focus on the things that are of significance to the seminary, recognizing that other things may not need to be changed. So some of the first things that we looked at, there are a couple of things anyway that the select board and the seminary have been discussing that would be in the development agreement. And so we've tried to pull out several of those things so they would be addressed in the development agreement that would dovetail with the bylaw change. Two of those that are good examples would be access, the issue of access to the seminary property once the bylaw has been adopted. That is one that really, because of the nature of the property, the fact that the planning board has in its wisdom determined that there would be a number of separate districts, we could anticipate that some districts would have different levels of access from others. We certainly, at this point, have no desire or intention as a seminary, as it continues to own the property, and parts of the property would be glad for the continued use that's been there for 50 years. We're fine with having people come on the property as they have. Going forward, we would anticipate a couple of issues that would come up. One is the potential issue for safety. There'd be safety concerns just given the recent events, even in Lewiston, Maine, et cetera, and around colleges and schools in the country, that the seminary would need to be in a position of being able to provide a safe environment if there were some issues that came up like that. And then also, it's conceivable that there would be some new purchasers of portions of the property that would have fairly sensitive things. I think of some of perhaps the biolab type places or biotech firms and that sort of thing that would be concerned about just the public having complete access to their premises, as well as some of the things that the planning board has designed in some of its illustrative plans. For example, on the top of the hill, that there would be over 55 age folks buying those units. And again, there'd be some privacy concerns there. But that is something that we would take up with the select board in terms of being able to have more flexibility than would be tied in a zoning bylaw. And then likewise, the preservation issues, I think, are better handled in the development agreement than in a bylaw. Just given the nature of the buildings that are up there, of course, we've kept them for 50 years, and the hope would be to be able to keep many, if not all of them, for the time going forward. But it may be that either the seminary itself or a buyer would want to make some changes, so we'd want to have some flexibility in what the preservation is that we would be subject to, and if it's locked into the bylaw, that makes it difficult to handle. Moving on then, there's some phrases that we were concerned about, the phrase resilient and sustainable. There are a couple of places where we thought it was better that the bylaw wouldn't lock us into that, taking sustainability as one, for example. LEED used to be, and has up until recently been sort of one of the standards for that. That's coming under some question now as to whether that's a thing and whether it should be some passive house type things, and that's coming under some criticism. So the vagueness of that concerned us. We think there's a way to have that without necessarily requiring it as part of the zoning bylaw. So you'll see that we've taken those words out. A third thing, and this one's really important to us, not that any of the others are not, but this is one of significant importance. When the seminary was approached initially by the town, and asked whether the seminary was open to an overlay district, we discussed it with folks at the master planning committee and others, and we then said that we could consider an overlay district. Of course, by definition, overlay district is to go over the current zoning. And so we've been concerned all along since the planning board raised the question of whether the underlying zoning uses would remain, and in the current draft, they're not remaining, and we have real concerns about that. We really think this should be, as it has been in our mind, and as we entered in good faith to the conversation with the planning board, that this is an overlay district, it's not a replacement district. And so we really want those current underlying uses, which is really the single-family residence, to remain. Now, I think we all agree that it's not the most ideal thing, and of course that's why we're having this whole conversation. We wouldn't even be here if we thought that ideally single-family residence was the way to go. But it's important for the seminary to have that as a possibility because so many of the things that the planning board has put on there are subject to special permit, which can be quite a hill to climb. And so we would need to have that kind of flexibility. So that's one of significance to us, that it doesn't replace, it would, in fact, we didn't make that red line, the word on 9.6.1.3, we just realized that we hadn't put in, it really should be retains the applicable underlying zoning district, and then you'll see the additions that we have put there in terms of 9.6.1.3. In addition, at the end of that, we want a clarifying statement in the bylaw, which, and you'll see it pops up in a couple of other places, which is that religious and educational uses are not going to be subject to the bylaw, rather than just relying on Section 3, having not be named, but rather have it in here, so there's no confusion that going forward, it's the commercial uses and that would be subject to the bylaw, not religious and educational. So those are two significant ones to the seminary. There are some drafting things. I think the board has been doing some work on the tables. We thought that some of the tables were, because of some of the recent changes, probably not necessary, and I think that the text in the zoning bylaw lays out what needs to be special permit and what is not. And so you'll see that we had suggested that maybe there's a doubling up of that might not be helpful. Another thing, and I don't know if you have the plan that we sent in, I sent it over, which is the overlay district. Oh, it's up, thank you, yeah. So we've gone through this, and we generally we're fine with all the different districts. It seems like maybe it's a little bit more complex than it needs to be. You know, we thought about it initially as with the consultants, that there'd be a lower campus, a central campus, an upper campus. But this is certainly something that the seminary is open to doing. But we think that there are some modest changes that will work well here. And so just maybe starting at the top and working our way down. One thing that we think is probably better managed in the development agreement would be the buffer zones. We walked the property and we're, measuring off 100 feet, which is sort of just the one dimension that's been provided for the entire perimeter, and really it's not related to the topography in a way that I think makes the most sense. So we'd ask the planning board to consider some tweaks to that. We certainly understand the need for a buffer and the desire for it, but for example, on the Bridge Street side, the seminary retains, and whoever owns that property will retain a 50-foot buffer of no-touch zone on the abutting property. So none of those owners are able to even enter into that and do any cutting or anything. It just has to be left as is. So adding another 100 feet, practically speaking, it actually comes across the road. Even in one point, 100 feet cuts off the existing academic center. And so it would envelop the road, it would cut into a building. Now, I understand the building doesn't get taken down, but it's an existing building, and I think it suggests that there's no buffer needed for another building that would replace it. So we would ask, for example, the top, that the buffer be pushed toward where the vegetation is, and that it track the existing parking lot. Coming down further toward NA, which is that 10-acre spot, which is at the gatehouse. We're actually proposing a new district here. As we looked at the gatehouse and looked at the uses, and you'll see that we've suggested some additional uses for the gatehouse, that area really, it would be an interesting site for something like a bed and breakfast or a small little hotel kind of a building, and which could be expanded. And so sometimes I think we haven't really looked at that together as closely as I think we could and maximize the benefit to the town in terms of if the seminary were to sell it, that the tax revenues that could come from something a little bit more intensive without really creating any issues for the neighborhood or the area. So we would suggest a separate zone there that we call it the Gatehouse District, and we could come up with a definition together of what would be allowed there. Given the nature of that slope and the fact that there's quite a bit of lawn right there, having that as an NA, a no-build zone, is a natural area, is a little bit, I think, it's asking too much. I think there's plenty of NA land up there to retain, but it would take away from the possibilities of expansion in a way that I think would be doable. And then coming down a little further, you'll see that I see the words crest of hill. Again, it's seeking to match the buffer with existing topography, rather than just having, sort of the blunderbuss 100 feet no matter what approach. If it traces along the crest of that hill, there's a fairly steep drop down to Bridge and Woodbury. And then coming further down, we've reconfigured. We would suggest that the CRC could take a bit more room from the UE At the bottom there, the yellow, so the blue would expand and expand and come across the street there. We're not particularly troubled about it, but it seemed that the NR at the top bit would work well just staying with the CRC. And so you'll see how we've kind of carved out the NR to be a little bit smaller and be primarily the E and F buildings. And so CRC would be expanded a little bit. And then the other one is, and this is important for us as well, is the UE up top, the utility expansion zone. It's not clear to us why that would need to be there. Certainly that property could be used for utility installations, but it could be under just BHCR. And so we'd like to see that, that the heritage landscape come down a bit, that boundary come down. When you walk it, you'll see how it just makes sense. Again, actually walking the property is really helpful and instructive to see where these things could be. And so there's a whole, you see the care hall at the bottom wing. When you come out there, there's actually a whole gazebo and a barbecue pit area, which could sustain if there was, if when we went back to the consultant plans, they had a design there, just a schematic drawing, as you know, where they knock off both of those wings that are extending toward the hill, and they fill that in and extend it out. And so we think that would be sustainable. It wouldn't impact there's a single abutter. They're located, the house is a little hard to see there, but it's actually to the left of HL. It's well down from there. And so we think that the HL could drop down. I think actually there's only maybe 2 or 3 trees in that area anyway. But so we'd like to see that come down. We also would like, in front of the retreat house, that there'd be a little bit more sort of, again, walking the property, taking a look at that buffer, or that HL district, and we just think it could, that SRC rather, could be pushed up a bit more without hindering the concern about views and that sort of thing. So I think we've inquired about the question marks at the bottom. Our understanding is that that's intended to be, the NA would be along, really, at this point there's some retaining walls, and it's really just wetlands and swamp at the edge of upland. So I think it's practically delineated physically on the ground, and that's what we understand there. We would tweak a little bit around the B building at the bottom, again, expanding the SD out a little bit toward the north, just partly because it may be possible, depending on, of course, wetlands and that sort of thing, but it may be possible to provide an access road into the right of B, and that would allow us to, and for the whole town really, to reduce traffic load coming in that back entrance off Woodbury, which I know has been raised as a concern by some abutters. So having that NA be shrunk just a little bit and have SD extend up to the north a little bit, I think would allow for that kind of a drive and perhaps parking and that sort of thing. So I think I've covered what we've put on there, but again, they're not major changes in the sense of let's get rid of entire districts or let's eliminate something. It's really trying to say what's on the ground, what are likely development options for either the seminary or for purchasers, and then what makes sense to protect. So those are some of the issues that we've done in terms of the districts themselves. The theme that you'll see that appears throughout it is that essentially a grandfathering. You know, that we noticed that, and I don't think it was the planning board's intent. In fact, I understand it to be the planning board intent that everything that is there will be compliant. So things like roads that exist would be deemed to be compliant rights of way, buildings are compliant, et cetera. So we just went in and sort of backfilled a few of those. And so if we're correct that we're on the same page on that, then I probably don't need to say more about that at this point. We had on 9.6.2.3, we weren't quite sure what was intended here, and it seemed, to the extent we could figure out what we thought we figured out what it meant, this idea that if an applicant was applying for a development of a piece of property for an allowed use versus one that required a special permit, that the whole thing would be subject to special permit. And that didn't make sense to us, because if we, for example, if we were to take Pilgrim Hall and we have allowed uses that are there, and then we want to extend it by 20% or something, we understand that the 20% would be subject to special permit, but it doesn't seem like that would make sense that whatever's allowed in there would now become subject to special permit. So we didn't think that was really necessary to have or helpful, so we took that out. Then you'll see we've gone through Retreat House, Pilgrim Hall, and Gatehouse, and we've suggested some additional uses. Again, you'll see that's as an example, we put in the educational religious uses just as confirmatory provisions so that there isn't confusion going forward about that. But then some other things that we think would be reasonable. Again, we made the consultant's report, and it seems like those are things that would be helpful to have. And then we made little things like we took small hotel bed and breakfast out just because it wasn't necessarily defined. I think it would be reasonable to have some kind of a number of beds or that sort of thing, but we think it's helpful really just to let the planning board at the time when they receive a presentation that they review that. Let's see. Yeah, as you know, we've had concerns all along that we've tried to express that, and this is part of that sort of underlying zoning use remaining, that so many of the things in here as drafted are subject to special permit. And we understand the planning board's concerns, but I think some of the give and take here that would be beneficial for the town, not just for the seminary, is that there'd be more things that are allowed and are permitted than special permit. We were at the meeting when the planning board went through and decided on uses and then decided whether they'd be special permit or permitted. And at that point, it was special permit 1 and special permit 2, which we understand may not be the case anymore. And so we weren't given an opportunity to weigh in at that point, so we've tried to say all along, we think that more things should be permitted rather than just everything be subject to special permit. And that seems consistent with what the select board wants. It seems consistent with townspeople who are concerned about tax revenues. The special permit, it's a tall hill to climb. There've been some recent applicants who have not been successful, and so something that is there. This is a different district, really. It's a district with existing buildings, and that's what makes it. This is kind of an unusual setting for all of us, but they're existing buildings, they're in use, they've been used intensively over the last 50 years, and so if it goes from use in educational use or religious use to an office use or a medical use, we think that should be allowed. Now we understand if you extend it, we add square footage to care or what have you, that would then trigger special permit review. And we also suggest that there are places that site plan review would be useful and appropriate. On 9.6.3.3, this is another sentence, number 1, subsection 1. We struck out that paragraph in part. Now, this may be that we didn't understand, but we think that we do understand what's here, but it wasn't. The word plans show up a couple of times, and it's not exactly sure which plans are plans, and if the plans that are approved by the planning board are the ones that are illustrative plans, or if these are proposed plans that are the plans that are approved. But we just thought that it'll create, I think, a couple of problems. It'll create confusion here. But it also seems, as drafted, to undercut the concept of allowable uses if it has ended up having to be approved. So perhaps we've misunderstood it, but that is one of the concerns that we had there. And then we put in here, maybe it's coming up in a minute here. Yeah, then we have, like I say, we've got some things on, in 9.6.3, et cetera, that are grandfathering things. Some of the changes we made in terms of illustrative plans, we think that, again, it streamlines it a bit better, which way it goes, whether it's site plan or allowable permitted versus a special permit process. We have, let me just look at some of the other things. I think some of them will, I'm not going to go every single one here in the interest of time for you all, but because I think some of them will make just their apparent sense as you read through them. We did go through and make some changes to a couple of the development standards. So, for example, one of the overall things, again, one of the unusual things about this zone is that it's a completely private property with there's no town road through it. There's no public access other than that which is allowed by the private landowners. There's not going to be, as far as we understand, the town's not going to accept the roads and pave them and care for them. And so there's no land, there aren't public parks or anything like that. So it's an entirely private parcel. And so we've tried to work with some of the buffers, internal buffers. Again, probably something that would be better either in a development agreement or really left to either the neighborhood association, if there's one formed, or the owners as they come in. So internal things, it didn't make sense to us that the planning board would regulate signage inside the campus, so that if, there's a development up top, that there's a sign in there that the townsfolk can't see it from any of the roads. It's hundreds of feet into the first intersection. So we just think that that's a bit of an overreach, and I think, and probably not necessary. It's something that we think that internally the owners can work on their own and negotiate on their own. Then in terms of the open space, we made substantive changes here, and it's really along that theme that this isn't the town's land. And it's not going to be the town's land. It's going to continue to be privately held, whether it's the seminary or private owners that come in and purchase portions of it, whether it's the apartments or some of the land to put in over 55, et cetera. And with things like the heritage landscape, the natural areas, the fact that there'll be square footage density limitations, et cetera, and the fact that it's currently pretty much all landscaped. The whole property is essentially landscaped except for the wetlands areas. And there will be, if we agree with conservation areas, there are going to be a lot of open spaces. There's a lot of nothing's going to be built, no buildings the entire road all the way up to the first intersection. There's just not room there. And so there are a lot of spaces here that are going to be open. And so we've made that more consistent with what you would typically see in a bylaw, instead of having things that are deeded over to the town in perpetuity. They're going to be square footage percentage requirements that are similar to what the zoning bylaw has elsewhere. But I think that's really the only workable way to do the open spaces. Do it more as a typical way than what's been proposed here. Lighting, really modest changes there. Again, some of it's grandfathering, some of it's saying these zones, the districts are so different in terms of where they are and their topography and their relation to one another, that having required consistency between, let's say, the top of the hill and the apartments is probably not necessary from an aesthetic perspective, and there might be operational and other reasons why different lighting would be better, certain types of lighting in one district versus in another district. So we suggested that be changed. And then we've got a few things to sidewalks and the like that we've made changes that I think are fairly self-explanatory when you see them. We went through, made some suggested changes to things like the trees. The trees, that's a big ask to ask for 6-inch trees. Those are really expensive. But we think that a reasonable thing would be to be able to plant, certainly replace trees, but saplings will grow. Every tree that's up there started as a sapling. We all started as kids. And so we think that that's fair to have replacement, but not with these kinds of really expensive approaches. And so we've made those kinds of things, and you'll see some of the others that are consistent with really trying to be realistic and, again, just keep coming back to this, that you can't see this from the land, from public. The public cannot see any of these things that are being regulated unless they're invited on to the property. And so asking the seminary, asking subsequent purchasers to make substantial investments for things, they certainly can do it if they own it for themselves, but again, to make it regulated, we felt was unnecessary. A few other things. We think 12 under 9.6.5 is really important, and that is we think the planning board should have discretion and authority to waive these development standards in 9.6.5. And the reason for that is part of the problem that the planning board has expressed, the frustration it's expressed, is that this is not a response to a specific plan, and therefore the planning board is frustrated because they're trying to come up with a rule of law that would apply to any kind of plan, the nature of which, the details of which none of us knows. And so we think it's important that the planning board have discretion to waive these various requirements as appropriate for the plan. And so there's always going to be some negotiation and some give and take with any applicant that comes before this board. And so we would encourage the board to adopt Section 12 as we've provided there to give you that kind of waiver, again, in the public interest or in the interest of safety or environmental features, et cetera. So that would be a benefit, I think, to the town and to the planning board. And then, of course, to an applicant who's able to convince the planning board that a waiver is worth doing. So there was 9.6.7.5. We added language there. We got a little concerned with this, just the simple phrase of the proposed development is compatible with adjacent land uses. And so we think there should be a presumption that having done all the hard work here, planning board and then all of the seminary and the abutters and townspeople of determining what allowable uses are, we thought that was a bit, for a finding for the special permit, it just seemed to reopen the entire question as to whether a use that was allowed and was listed as appropriate for the particular district now is compatible with adjacent land uses. So we think that there should be a clear presumption that if it conforms to the uses and densities and standards in the BHOD, then it is deemed to be compatible. And then we tried to clarify and simplify number 2 with respect to there are landscaping standards which the planning board has carefully put together, and the finding would be that should be, rather than introduce another set of criteria, that it's consistent with the landscaping standards. We think that will provide something a little more straightforward for everybody, the applicant and the planning board. And likewise with some of the issues, number 6, adequate water and sewer. We wanted to make sure that that was narrowed to something that's workable, that yes, there's enough water and sewer capacity and public services in order to handle what's out there. And then, again, we simplified a few of the others with respect to visual buffering and the like. And then the balance, I think, for the most part, we thought that some of the definitions, unless there was something that was unique to the BHOD, that we should just rely on the ones that are in the zoning bylaw. But this is You know, just that's more, I think, Madam Chair, as you said, more stylistic. In the building height, we did want some allowance.
smart, though, just to kind of see what was happening.
Yes. Ours is a little newer, and it's smaller and more efficient. Achieve Renewable did it. They're out of Salem.
The solar controls and the geothermal controls all in a little tiny space. They all subs gathered in there, and they said, can't fit, won't fit. And they complained and they complained. And then they all worked together, and it all fit. And it was
In the
so
beginning, that was
tiny,
us.
They brought their wives over.
Yeah, that wasn't
To show
even,
off the beautiful living space.
okay. I don't think we ever ended, we never stopped recording or anything, so.
I think we did pause in our recording.
You guys are all set.
We're all set.
Okay.
Okay, we're back in business, and for the benefit of the audience, I think you may have perceived that the fire alarm went off. So if you have rejoined us, welcome back. I think we were out there, what, about 15 minutes? And there's no fire. It was just the fire alarm. So that's the good news. So, Mr. Walters, you may
Madam
proceed.
Chair.
If you can remember where you were.
I was doing my best not to be alarming. Yeah, we were just, I actually was just coming to the end of the bylaw itself. The only other thing we had touched on was the description of the planned district and table of uses, and we've made some suggested changes there that I already mentioned in terms of going from special permit to permit and adding some uses that we thought would be consistent in some of the zones. So that really is it. Madam Chair, I'd be delighted to have more detailed conversation with the board. We've not had a chance yet to go through all the densities and the square footages, et cetera. So you saw from our submission that we've just said that we're still working through that, but we wanted to get this to the board.
Well, you have to understand that some of that information in the draft overlay district had not been really discussed
Yeah.
by all members of the planning board. They were out there, but had not been finalized. So you may want to hold your fire on that
Okay.
until such time as we actually take a look at it. But as I said, my goal here is to create a framework so that the planning board can review in a really systematic and organized way the changes that you've brought to our attention. And then once we've done that, and we can invite the public to make their comments, and then we can have you back and have more of a dialogue about what the planning board feels is appropriate under the circumstances. But I can't speak to that now.
Right.
But it's important to address the different issues systematically, and if we were to just start talking, we wouldn't necessarily come to any kind of a resolution among ourselves, let alone give you any clarity with where we stand with respect to the document.
Yeah.
So I think that probably makes sense to you.
It does. That's wonderful. I really appreciate the opportunity, and as we said each time, we deeply appreciate the planning board's work on this and the extraordinary amount of time and effort that has gone into it to date, and we know that there'll be some more, and we're ready to help any way we can.
Right, and if you have any information about the development agreement, or you and Joe and Sean can report to us, we're always interested in knowing where things stand with respect to that document.
Certainly. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Okay. So, oh yeah, you too. Don't eat too much. So the next two items on our agenda sort of dovetail, and I'm going to assume that you all got the memorandum I had Patrick send around?
Dated November 21st.
Yes.
No.
It's after the red line bylaw, I believe.
It's under section 3.
Essentially, Rick, what I did is I informed the planning board that rather than spend time discussing the master plan, the planning board members can go to the YouTube video and watch Judy Barrett and Tyler Marin update the select board on the status of the master plan. So rather than duplicate or attempt to duplicate what she said, that information is available on the YouTube, and there's also a web page for the master plan that's readily accessible. So what I did in the memorandum is just point out that the goals, they're still in draft form, but becoming close to finalized. The economic development goal, the housing goal, and the land use goal all are supportive of an effort by the planning board to promote a form-based code for the downtown. And I'm pleased that the Hamilton Development Corporation is also supportive of that goal as well. So yesterday at the select board meeting, the Hamilton Development Corporation provided a really good summary of their efforts to obtain a $5 million grant for downtown improvements. And I'll ask Rick to speak to that very generally. But that type of work could be a real stepping stone for a consultant or consultants to come on board and help the town draft a form-based code for the downtown that would be consistent with the master plan. And in my memorandum, I also pointed out all the other benefits of that form-based code. And I will point out that with respect to a form-based code, there's nothing that requires a property owner to change their building, and it's always forward-looking. And by that I mean it can be forward-looking in the short term, but also in the long term. So in my opinion, you know, the form-based code should look at the Winthrop School site, but whether that site actually comes to the town in the short term or the long term really doesn't matter. We can do the form-based code in any event. And so, depending on the decision of the powers that be, who are determining where this new elementary school will go, that shouldn't impede the formation of, or the drafting of an RFP and attempting to go forward with convincing the select board that funding this form-based code is really consistent with the master plan and would have substantial benefits for the town. So Rick, I don't know if you want to just tell us briefly about what the HDC did with respect to attempting to get this $5 million grant.
Sure. Back in really almost a year ago, the HDC pursued, along with the town, development of a MassWorks grant for what ended up being about a $5 million infrastructure improvement from Linden Street along Bay Road to the pool, including new 6-foot sidewalks on both sides of Bay Road, and doing the same on Railroad Ave and Willow Street and Asbury from Willow to Bay Road, and include bike lanes and pedestrian safety improvements, especially along Railroad Avenue and at Asbury, to try and reconnect the downtown. And the HDC appropriated $100,000, and the town did the same thing, and we hired a consulting engineering firm, BSG, that did extensive survey work and pre-engineering, which is a requirement under MassWorks that any project that you're submitting for be construction-ready. So we engaged that consulting firm, and they went through the work and did it successfully. And we submitted in our proposal in, I believe it was the end of May, early June, for that money to make that happen. Unfortunately, the state did not fund the proposal. We haven't had a debrief to understand what the issues were, but we knew that it was a highly competitive grant, and it's really targeted to economic development in more distressed areas. But we thought it was worth going through the exercise to at least have the discussion and get into very specific discussion about what kinds of infrastructure improvements could be made to the downtown to try and reunite it, make it more pedestrian friendly, engage traffic calming measures, encourage more walking and biking in the downtown. So that was the genesis of doing so. And then last night, we asked the select board to consider discussing with the finance committee, putting into the capital plan some portion of that $5 million to at least deal with Railroad Ave, Willow Street, and Asbury to Bay Road, since it would be significantly less costly and we're not dealing with a state highway. So that discussion is ongoing, and we will be meeting with the FinCom to discuss both the form-based code that Marnie was referring to, as well as the adding the capital into the capital plan for redeveloping those streets that I mentioned.
So the select board approved the capital, not the expenditure, but having it as a potential expenditure in the capital.
It gets into the queue for
right.
future consideration.
Right.
It doesn't mean that it will happen.
Right. So they voted unanimously to get it in the queue. With respect to the form-based code, there was a lot of interest, and I think very positive interest in that, but in terms of specific funding for it, I think the select board was just uncertain as to how it should be funded and when it should be funded. So I think our task as the planning board is to convince the select board that sooner is better than later. And I think that's particularly important because of the MBTA communities law that will be hanging over the town, if you will, in one form or another. So it's important to get started on this. And I know John Whitten has indicated that he does not necessarily see a problem with the 3A district and a form-based code. And Patrick, you received communication from the I have to go through the name again, Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities. And they, the woman who you dealt with also didn't foresee substantial impediments. So I think under those circumstances, we should really look into drafting an RFP, and Emil, as everyone knows, has already begun that endeavor. So I think if we were to move along in that direction and be advocates with the HDC, we might get some traction on that.
Yeah, I think, can I chime in here?
Certainly.
I think what we concluded last night was the select board was concerned about the optics of approving $150,000 for a form-based code for the reuse of Winthrop and including the downtown in that form-based effort, because that decision about what happens with Winthrop has not yet been made, and they felt that it would be premature, and people would, it would just set up the select board for criticism, saying, well, you've already determined, in fact, what's happening with Winthrop. It's just a fait accompli, when in fact it's not. It's the school committee that will make that decision. I think, talking with Marnie and the HDC, we thought, based on that quick conversation last night, that it probably would make sense for the planning board, the HDC, and hopefully the FinCom, because the FinCom clearly would like to recapture that property and turn it into a tax-generating parcel, is to make their position known about what they'd like to happen in terms of future planning on a form-based code at that site when and if it's actually abandoned by the schools. So there's some uniformity of opinion by the planning board, HDC, and we don't know about the FinCom. HDC is meeting with them next week to present the proposal, discuss our activities, and see if the three boards can at least express a uniform, consistent opinion that this should go forward if the Winthrop is in fact abandoned by the school committee.
Well, you know, that's kind of a discussion point, because I actually think that even if the Winthrop school isn't abandoned, the form-based code could still have some positive benefits. And it's not to say that in 15 years, the Winthrop school wouldn't be abandoned. So we can plan for whatever the eventuality is and not actually have to be engaged in whatever the school committee were to decide.
I think in that case, though, you risk doing what we've done in the past, which is spend hundreds of thousands of dollars on studies for projects that
Well,
never
this
get
actually
done.
wouldn't be a study. This would actually produce the form-based code. And the benefit of a form-based code is that other than expenditures in the public realm, and that's the $5 million queue in the capital account, it's the individual property owners that comply with the form-based code, or developers comply with the form-based code. So after the initial expenditure, there's no further expenditure required except for the improvements to the public realm, which in the case of Hamilton, I don't think there's really much argument that our sidewalks and roadways could be improved. That's the public realm. But it's not it's not a study, it's the finished product.
The difficulty in getting that passed, and, you know, of course, it's like it's the catch-22 of getting something approved for, you know, a project that's not on the table. It's kind of like what we're doing now with Gordon Conwell, right? And then you can see the difficulty in that.
Well, this is a bit
It leaves to
different.
question the unknown,
Yeah.
and nobody has a project to consider, so why are we spinning our wheels on a
Well,
bylaw?
because you have the MBTA communities as a right district that the town is going to have to grapple with.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the development.
That's a different thing, though.
Oh, no, that's, the form-based code can actually protect the character of the town from any really untoward, crazy development scenario that would really exceed the town's infrastructure to handle.
Yeah.
So that has to play into the thought process, and I know that's a little bit difficult to understand. But if the town were to adopt the as of right multifamily zoning, 15 units per acre, that could be serious potential serious consequences to those sites that became available unless there were a form-based code to modulate how things worked given the town's infrastructure. So the form-based code is really a stopgap to make the 3A compatible with the character of the town. That's my opinion. I don't know if it's shared by other members of the planning board, but I don't look at the form-based code the way one could look at the Patton Park master plan, and I'm not commenting on the expenditure of funds for that. But the plan exists on paper, but when is the money going to be there to implement that plan? If you spend money for a form-based code, that's consultants, but they give you the finished product.
Sure.
Then it's adopted by the town as of right, and that can be kind of in coordination with the 3A zoning if the town were to adopt it. The town might elect not to adopt it, but we need to really understand what kind of financial penalties the town would suffer if it didn't adopt it.
It wouldn't be my opinion that the form-based code is the solution to the MBTA 3A.
It's not a
I think
solution.
it's-
Let
That's
me
what's
just-
being described, I think, is like a protection against the thing we're doing this. I think they're could be related, but I think they're separate. They're
I think the
separate.
public actually, from what I've seen and heard, I think the public actually thinks what you're saying.
I'm
That the 3A and the
emulating
form-based code are going
the town.
together. I'm not saying that's accurate, I'm just saying I think that's what's out there,
yeah.
from what I've heard from people.
I just don't think that opinion we're expressing is the opinion that is shared collectively.
No, probably not. But I will say this, the real strength of what we're trying to do here is the code. Because if you did this without the code, like I guess the town did at Charette a couple of years back, and then that's it. Everybody goes home, great job, nothing happens, then maybe it is used to inspire something else. But the code is a thing that makes the difference. So the code is done to create this master plan that develops the cohesive downtown and distributes the different uses around and and hopefully solves some of the issues, some of the problems like intersections at main roads and that sort of thing. That's what the code will do. It's not going to solve, if the town decides it does not want to build 731 housing units in its downtown area, it's not going to happen. Because it's 48 acres. You know, that's never been the case. That to me is still kind of a moving target, what the actual requirements are, other than, from my standpoint, they do say the density, they establish that, and 20% has to be within a half mile of the train station and so forth. This is not over yet. This hasn't even started.
Yeah.
So, but it would have to go in the mix in terms of, it goes on the table as a discussion point for if you're doing something with your downtown, well, by the way, we need to follow the law and look at that. And so it's not a.
But you're saying they're related, though. You're expressing the philosophy behind.
Well, you have to. I mean, there's no way, if you're looking at your downtown, you don't want to deal with them separately.
Because the other thing isn't
You can't,
known. The other
It's
thing
what?
is yet, the MBTA requirements and that, if we're talking about the same thing,
yeah.
those are not clearly set out yet.
Well,
So to develop
the
something.
legal part is pretty much set.
Oh,
but
yeah, it
But the
is.
numbers are not set.
Yeah.
And,
Well, Patrick, you can clarify, the guidelines have established the numbers.
Right, they have.
731.
Numbers and the acreage.
Right.
yeah.
So they've been established pursuant to these guidelines. And as John Whitten said, guidelines are not the same as regulations, but those guidelines have established those numbers. So the 731 units, there's no requirement that they're actually, they have to be built. The bylaw just has to say the zoning permits that to happen.
I think our obligation here is to put the subject on the table for a consultant to make that decision, or the team that comes, you know, to what degree are you going to comply, or that's a town decision, but they're going to have to deal with that.
Well, it's all
We're not-
subject to the infrastructure.
We're not really setting up a program here, you know, in terms of you must do this, this, and this. We're trying to get somebody from, an expert team from the outside to come in and look at this holistically, our downtown area. And as Marty was saying, whether the Winthrop School stays there or doesn't, it would be a discussion about, number one, do you want to include that in the line that delineates what your town center district is? And if there's any thought that in the future, the school might not be there because whatever reason, then that should be taken as part of the consideration. So that the whole downtown area will still be designed, so to speak,
Yeah,
and
but how many what-if scenarios are gonna be built into the proposal around, like, are you gonna take in consideration the residential homes that are separating then the Winthrop School from the downtown area? Will you take in consideration some other, you know what I mean, that it's a fuzzy scope to define.
I don't quite understand, but
I think the answer to your question is yes, all of those things would be taken into consideration, and you're not designing something hard and fast, you're designing a set of big picture relationships, you know, between the disparate zones downtown, and Winthrop School's but one ingredient. 3A, or the MBTA mandate, is but one ingredient. And the bigger picture is, where does Hamilton want their downtown to go? And what I think is interesting is if you look at the underlying impulse behind the MBTA mandate, if you take away the metrics, the insanity of the metrics, if you look at the underlying impulse, it makes sense, and it actually dovetails with the master plan in a lovely way.
Yeah.
It's just that the metrics are askew. So we can't predict where those metrics will actually land in terms of enforcement, the rest of the state, how the other townships will respond to it, where the state will land with its policy and enforcement. We can't predict any of that. But we can certainly run at a general goal that literally dovetails with the master plan, the economic development of downtown, the economic development and preservation of Hamilton, and the potential that, you know, Winthrop School might be an ingredient in the future, it might not be, it doesn't really matter. Even if it's not in play in the future, it's still, you know, a piece of the puzzle that's there. You know, it's a piece of property that has edges to other things. And the interesting thing about the process is it does look at edges. It looks at the relationships between things instead of bits and pieces that are just put together like a collage. It's not a collage. It's just like in the Gordon Conwell process, the neighborhoods that were created were a tapestry of relationships. And that would be the same process that a consultant would go through downtown. And what I think will be interesting is to look at the goals of the master plan, really understand the underlying goals of the MBTA process, and work with a consultant to see what opportunities there are that put all those pieces together. So I think it's all positive. And I wouldn't get lost on what the outcome of the Winthrop School decision will be, or what the outcome of 3A is. You know, there's some wonderful opportunities for the town in that process.
I've never seen an actual economic development analysis of downtown Hamilton. I had a student once, many years ago, I'm sure he's retired, who, you know, made a real living out of going around to towns and very, very carefully analyzing what were the economic factors for retail or industrial development or whatever, and telling them what future they did or did not have. And I don't recall ever having seen that done for Hamilton. But there's this presumption that we need to plan something because there's a lot of potential there that's not being realized. And I've always been very skeptical of that, and our only question is, has anybody come around and actually tested that hypothesis?
yeah.
You know, an economic development strategist.
Right.
Yeah, it was interesting. I was looking at, because Littleton Common was done in 2020, and I've looked at that project a little bit. It's quite a fascinating way that they proceeded through this. They went through the form-based code analysis, and
Is Littleton?
Littleton, Mass.
I know
Yeah,
where it
I'm
is.
sorry, did I say Connecticut? No, Littleton, Mass.
Littleton.
Littleton, Mass, yeah.
I've been there, I know.
It's called Littleton Common was the district within the town that is their downtown, and that was that's online. You can get really their whole document. But to answer your question, Bill, what they actually did was, they identified all the places they called soft spots, in the downtown areas that were either, the property was quite deep and they didn't take full advantage of the rear part of the property, or there was different types of development that were about to go out of business, and there were inefficiencies that were built in because of the geometry. Because it was done piecemeal over a long period of time, there was not an organized way that downtown came together. And what they came up with was, a lot of times the new codes are going to change the setbacks. It'll be a build-to line that might be 0 right on the sidewalk, whereas now it might be 35 feet, because that's what zoning codes do. Everything downtown has to be 35 feet off the road or whatever, whatever the particular metric is. And in the side yards, so you can actually demonstrate all of the advantages that could be acquired. You can't build new land, but what you can do is make the land more efficient for utilization. And it doesn't mean you have to build on it, but it gives you the opportunity that should the town desire it, and should there be a need for it, it's there. And
So did they build out Littleton Common? I haven't been there recently.
no, they just adopted it in 2020, the code. So,
Okay, but I mean, but there wasn't,
no, this
wasn't a rush of economic development. Well, in 2020, we were all
this,
squirreled away.
I'm sure you know this, but the time to really start planning is in a period like we're in right now. We're in a slow economic period. This is the time you want to do your planning, not when things are going high speed. So we have really the opportunity here to take advantage of that. But Littleton was projecting that this is going to take 30 years to be fully built out, because as Marnie was saying, none of the existing businesses there are obliged to make any changes unless they want to have reinvestment in the property, significant reinvestment, and change their building. Then they would have to comply with the new regulations. So I think that that's the way it's been worked out in the past, so I think that would be the way it's done here. Again, that's a decision but there's usually that safety valve for what happens to non-conforming sites already, going down the line. So that has to be considered.
To Emil's point, very specifically, Hamilton is chock full of those soft spots, odd-shaped lots, parking areas that are used inefficiently, excessive number of curb cuts. You can literally itemize them as you walk up and down the streets.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too far into that, but they exist.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that a lot of the nature of my business, both on the planning end of it and even on the building end of it, is frequently we're asked to take an existing space. I'll use an example of an industrial campus. We're asked to look at an industrial campus, and we can't make it any bigger, and it has, we can't undo anything, but we look at it and look literally for the soft spots or the things that are inefficient. And simple things like reversing the direction of traffic or changing where the parking is. Suddenly you have opportunities for buildings that didn't exist before. Just tiniest little changes send ripples through situations like that. So I would look at this very optimistically, especially if an interdisciplinary team comes in and looks at this holistically. There's a lot of potential. That's all.
And Bill, to answer your question, Urban Land Institute, at the behest of Hamilton Development Corporation, came in 2015 and did an economic analysis of downtown, and the report is on the HDC website.
What?
The Urban Land Institute, at the behest of HDC, came in 2015 and did an economic analysis of the downtown opportunities, impediments, identifying.
When was it? When was that?
2015. So where are we going?
Well, I think what Marty wanted to do is talk a little bit about the RFP, request for proposal, to start drafting that. So I wanted to share some information this evening with you that has been developed to date, and this would be on the table for discussion. Patrick sent out, I think, this afternoon, copies. I have copies here that I can hand out so you can read it if you. He couldn't make copies because he sent it to you by email, but I guess he couldn't make copies because the copy machine was not working. There's 4 copies there. Let's take one. And then this is a note sheet. And I'll just do kind of a quick.
That's the second page.
Can I share my screen?
And if you attend the
Click on it.
meeting,
I don't see any share screen on this.
it's because you're not in the meeting. Oh, there you go. You're not a panelist yet.
Okay. I looked online at, this is a document that, I guess I gotta unmute, no, I don't wanna do that. I looked online at the Office of the Inspector General and to see what the requirements for an RFP is, and it was interesting, they, because I wanted to be sure of the contents, that we got all of the contents. I also dug up the master plan RFP. I think it was drafted by Patrick Shannon when he was here. He did, I thought it was kind of a nice job that he did on that. Quite a large file that he had. But this document from the Inspector General's office is quite extensive. I'm going to turn to the table of contents because what I was looking at primarily was the what section that we had to that was kind of the controlling part of this. Slow loading.
So, Emil, what do you want to accomplish tonight?
What I want to do is just kind of introduce the RFP as it's drafted and leave it with the board to make comments over a period of time. And so that's what I want to introduce that to. But this particular document, Chapter 30B, stipulates that for services over $50,000, that gives you a list of steps that you have to follow. So I'm going to get rid of this and go to the go to another.
Yeah, and in fact, this is the same template we used when we hired Tragorth to do the $8 million redevelopment of Willow Street. So we actually have the evaluation form laid
Yeah.
out, so it's quite easily adapted to the.
So you're familiar with this then?
Oh, yeah, it's standard operating procedure for municipals and state agencies.
Yeah, this is the document. I just sort of stripped it down. So step 1, document your decision and so forth. Step number 2 is where it says first bullet, purchase description or scope of services. So this, in the RFP, this is an important part of the document. So what I just handed out was the request, the scope of services that I'd like to review with you. I put it here on the document to, right here. And scope of services in this case, we're not telling this is for the consulting team. We're going to send out an RFP, and the reason it's an RFP and not an invitation for bid, for example, is that it's important, I think, that we have the freedom to select the consultants that we would like to have because of their qualifications, not a low bid. I think if we were interested in a bid, if we were purchasing a product, that a low bid might be a way to go, but we're looking for particular qualifications from a consultant team that has done projects of a similar nature, ideally, so that they are familiar with the issues around small-town development.
That definitely gives you a lot better discretion
Yeah.
in your selection process.
And that's the key. So that's why it's an RFP, and we have to stipulate in this RFP why we came to that conclusion. So there has to be a write-up before the scope of services that defines the town a little bit and describes what some of the overriding issues are. And this is where I thought maybe 3A could be mentioned in there, or some of the key things that this board feels maybe should be included as something they should be made aware of in advance of submitting a proposal to the planning board or to the town. We also have to decide who actually is going to run this process. I think the planning board, we're just taking the initiative to start the process, to write it up. Maybe the select board wanted to see it. They mentioned that last night. Want to be sure that they can get a chance to review it, which is, of course, proper. But we're taking the initiative just to get it moving and in a way kind of fashion it because of maybe our knowledge of the form-based codes. But the scope of service here, the first topic, primary work product, this is critical. The first is initial review and analysis, and then there's A through D, interviews, site analysis, media coverage, and website. So these are instructions to the consultants that this would be part of their work product. Because what we're trying to do, many people who respond to this just essentially do an hourly count. They look at each of the tasks and they'll come up with how many hours is it going to take me to do this, and what do we charge per hour, and to come up with a reply. Number 2 is public design process, and this would start with generate necessary background maps. The town has the GIS system, but so the town will provide all necessary base maps information as needed by the consultant. And I think the GIS maps that the town have would be sufficient for what they would need in this case. B is public workshop and/or design charrette. This tends to be one of the really costly parts of the project because if it's a design charrette, typically it has been 3 to 4 days on-site work. That means the design team has to convene in Hamilton with all their people involved. They have to set up shop somewhere, could be in a library, or meeting house, or some other place, but some hall, set up a workshop, and then run the charrette for a couple of days to gather information. That's a very costly part of this. In talking with some planners, they sort of gone back to the workshop or gone to a workshop method. So not going to predict which way they're going to do it, because they're going to be asked to list what approach do they want to take in producing this work product. And so they're going to tell us, in a way, what they can do for the amount that they're offering. So this is the public workshop and design. This is, the consultant will organize and lead design workshops to engage the community, gather ideas and goals, and formulate potential strategies. The consultant will tailor the workshop or charrette to obtain maximum community input to produce the best possible master plan on which to base the new code and so forth. I won't read everything here. Number 3 is drafting the form-based code. So now the consultant has gathered the information, they've done the analysis on the project, they've talked with the people, so the program is established, they know what the problems are, and now they're going to prepare a form-based code to address that to codify that information that they have. So that, design parameters for the form-based code. The new code will regulate development to ensure high-quality public spaces defined by a variety of buildings, types, and uses, including housing, retail, and office space. So we're giving them kind of a sense of multi-use there. It will incorporate a regulating plan, building form standards, street standards, use regulation as needed. Descriptive buildings or lot types and other elements needed to implement the principles of functional and vital urbanism and practical management of growth. Sections of this document would typically include the following. It'd be an overview, the regulating plan, building form standards, public space standards, each one of these bullets, parking locations and management standards. So we're telling them that they have to assemble a series of experts or other consultants with this expertise to create this work product in the town of Hamilton. So they would, put together, in addition to planners, architects, landscape architect, engineers, and so forth, to take a look at all existing conditions. And then integration of the form-based code. So the code gets integrated into Hamilton's existing regulatory framework, so it gets dovetailed in. A lot of legal implications here. That's part of their work as well. And at number 4, refining the form-based code. So this is the presentation of the first draft, the presentation of a second draft, meetings with stakeholders. So this goes through a couple of iterations because they're looking for agreement on the part of the town, usually with the decision makers here in town, and including a planning board. So they're working up a final draft, and then it goes through the approval process, which is public hearing presentations and additional revisions. Again, one of the neat things about this particular process is that there'll be a lot of public hearings as this unfolds, so the public will be aware of this, and they go through part of that education process, so when you come to the approval process, hopefully they're informed enough and participated enough to be in full agreement with what the town is doing. Submittal summary, again, this is part of what's required by the state. Define how many identical copies have to be submitted, a brief description of the consultant's approach to the project, expertise of the team assembled by the consultant to carry out the work. Number 3, a list of comparable projects undertaken by the consultant or team members. 4, a copy of at least one municipal form-based code previously created by the consultant and adopted into law. So, again, we're listing some of the criteria required that will influence the final decision. Recommended format for submittals, description of approach. This is key. Up to 2 pages describing a consultant's typical approach to projects similar to this one, including the nature of the public process and intended extent of public involvement. Again, I think a lot of different firms are going to have slightly different approaches to it, and hopefully the numbers, will be in the range that we're looking at this stage. The team expertise is another item we need to know about. That's brief description of general qualifications, the multidisciplinary nature of the team assembled for the project, specific evidence of relevant experience, creating form-based codes, and a list of key personnel that would be available to work on this project. And then comparable projects listed, and then a sample code document for review. And then for the evaluation of the submittals, they must demonstrate the following. First bullet, experience in preparing municipal form-based codes. 2, experience in building community consensus. Strong graphic skills, strong skills in written and oral communication. Experience in identifying, evaluating, codifying, and explaining the essential qualities of community design and character. And experience in writing or implementing municipal land development regulations. So this is all information we are telling them to prepare or be prepared to answer. And then the town of Hamilton will evaluate all submittals to determine which consultants have the experience and qualifications that are most suited for this project. The town of Hamilton may request personal interviews with the highest ranked consultants, or may request one or more prospective consultants to submit detailed proposals, which may include the following. 1, detailed description of methodology being proposed. 2, work program detailing, and so forth. And then 3, methods of consultant purposes to use to manage the project and communicate with the town of Hamilton. Identification of key personnel and their qualifications, hourly rates, and data expected to be provided by what are they asking the town to provide them in addition to that. So that really constitutes the scope of work. And again, I took a lot of this information from the Form-Based Code Institute to get some examples. I looked on many samples, of scope of services that are available because it's free information online, different projects. And again, I like the Littleton because of its size. It's a town of about 10,000, I believe, very similar character. A town that loves it, is very proud of its character in the community, and so the list that they would come up would be, I think, very similar to what would happen here.
And once again, what's your estimate about the size of the budget that these sponsors are going to suggest, 150?
That's the number we have right now, yeah. I'm trying to get, I've sent out a couple of feelers to get information, and I'm finding that everybody's really pretty reticent to hand out anything with any kind of guidance. I was hoping for at least something that would give you a range of costs. The only number I did find was public information, again, from Littleton, from the town planner there, actually was in a paper, that they said that the cost to hire this particular company to do that, a company called UTIL out of Boston, they look like a really accomplished consultant. That number was $42,000, which I find unbelievable, unless they used other money from other sources. There is a lot of money, in my experience anyway, from that funds planning, if you have the right information when you write up for the grant, because they look for particular things in that, and they want certainty that the money isn't going to go to waste. And so
Did you,
whatever you can do to.
excuse me, did you see the RFP that was used by the town of Littleton?
No, I don't have that. I don't know.
I did ask for it.
Did you ask for it?
I also asked for
Yeah.
the monetary value of their consultant contract. I also emailed Judy Barrett just a couple of minutes ago to see if she had any understanding of what the going rate was for a form-based zoning code.
Yeah, I talked with her right after we had that visioning session and at the junior high just a week or two ago. I cornered her at the end and
Good job.
tried to twist her arm about getting some feedback in terms of, okay, her firm responds to a lot of these, apparently. It's the kind of work they would sign up for as part of a team. So she may not be the leader of the team, her outfit, but they would a lot of times be consulted, brought in as a team member. So I was looking for her for some kind of number, but again, she was pretty quiet about giving out. I mean, she doesn't know who I am or what I am or whatever. So, but anyway, yeah, you know, my base, Simsbury did this project. It's a town twice the size of Hamilton. They did it now about 8 to 10 years ago. They adopted the plan, and that was done for $110,000. So it's, you know, at that point, I do know that, and I did talk with the principal in that firm in Texas, and he was the one, and it was about the Gordon Conwell project, you know, and I think I gave him 100 acres and that we're trying to do a master plan for the entire site there. And what he told me was, he said, you should be able to do that fully developed. And he said there are a couple of shortcuts, everything you need for under $100,000 for that project. So it sort of gave me a little bit of confidence, and 150 is probably, I think that'll give us a good product for that kind of money.
Yeah.
So, and he was the one who said that he wouldn't do the charrette again. He said, don't hire Dover Coal, but that's a jealousy thing, competition. But he said go with 4 workshops, and that'll be all you need for it. And so that's the only price information. I did contact UTIL, and they didn't want to respond. I contacted the firm down in Providence. I don't know if you know Union Street or something like that.
Yeah,
They did the
they're
Newburyport
quite good.
waterfront. They're excellent credentials on those folks, and they did a nice job, I thought, in Newburyport.
Well, let's, because of the
Anyway,
time
I'm
here,
sorry.
I mean, I think that this is a really excellent start. I'd like to take a straw poll of the planning board to see if we should pursue this. I think the HDC is strongly behind it. I certainly think it's well worth pursuing, and I would just ask, we'll just go around. I don't know if we should actually take a formal vote at this point, but whether the majority of the board thinks that this is worth pursuing. So I'll just start, Pat.
You can be honest, Pat.
Yeah, I mean, I'm in favor of the philosophy. I find I struggle with traction, and certainly would love to see us align on goals before endeavoring. That's one. I mean, the one major element missing is why
Well, I
the
think.
RFP. So I think if
Yeah.
we were aligning on why before agreeing to go down the road, then I would be much more comfortable.
Did you see the goals set forth in the master plan that were in my memo?
I saw, but I'm speaking of the RFP, I guess.
Oh, so,
yeah.
but see, I think that the point I tried to get across is that I think that the form-based code can implement the goals that are set forth in the master plan. And, because,
Yeah, but I'm just saying, if we're
Are you talking about the goals of the planning board, the goals of the consultant? What are
goals of
they going to do? Or
goals behind
Mhm.
proposing to develop an RFP to go, it's helpful always if you're a consultant, an engineer, an
Yeah.
architect, if you know the reasoning behind why
Yeah,
anyone would be looking to spend.
as I said,
money
what's
on-
missing there is I have to write the
Yeah.
4-piece or the preface to that, because that's where you have to write up why are you looking for a form-based
Sure,
code.
sure, yeah.
So I got to write that up, but that would be maybe that would.
But that's why I guess that's what I'm suggesting in lieu of, instead of asking the question of whether or not I think I would agree that we should start there. Start with the beginning in aligning on what the goals would be before writing and agreeing that we're going to go forward with an RFP.
well, I
We
mean.
did. Do you have the objectives section there?
Yeah, I do.
On the original.
And I know the master plan outlets and your memo outlines it, but we have yet to discuss amongst us and align on what they are. You know what I mean?
I originally put a series of objectives in scope of services. And there were 5 of them I had. Number 1, create a solid foundation for subsequent on-site planning and technical meetings leading to a regulatory framework that reflects major concerns and common themes while securing Hamilton's historic legacy and valued resources. That's number 1. Number 2 is utilize a multidisciplinary planning approach that teams the town, local knowledge, and talent with design consultants, outside expertise. Number 3, establish public confidence in community-based planning as the best strategy to manage development that represents the best interests of all stakeholders. Number 4, reinforce applicant, landowner, developer confidence that the process will bring more predictability and therefore certainty to the approval process. And 5, implement the 2004 and 2023 Hamilton Master Plan where applicable. I mean, that was a set of objectives I had put in there originally, and
Yeah.
took it.
I
Is that the
think
kind
we
of
should-
goal?
Yeah, we should, I would be suggesting that we start there, because I don't fully, I mean, I'm not 100%, especially the last, kind of, where applicable, it's, I would agree that we could all spend time aligning on a goal of an effort before endeavoring on the effort.
Well, this was still in draft form, so,
Yeah.
we want to, so let's, so Jonathan, what do you have to say?
That dovetails beautifully to what I was going to say, which is I agree with Pat that there's a need to get alignment as to why we're doing this, and also to look at this is great as a template, but what's unique about Hamilton's needs, Hamilton's challenges, Hamilton's goals that would focus this and focus the RFP process and why we're doing this. And I think that's a healthy discussion. And I think it would elicit more focus for the cover letter of the RFP, the positioning statement, and it would also focus the selection criteria for the consultant. So I encourage that discussion, but I support this process, and I support what Pat just said. There's
So,
a
but
fuller
in other
discussion.
words, the question I'm really asking is, should we move forward, continue our discussions?
Yes, and yes.
And try and get agreement of an RFP that we can transmit to the select board?
Yes, and yes to the fuller discussion.
So obviously, we have more work to do.
Yes.
But it's the process that I want to, should we keep moving on this? Because if we agree that this is potentially good, then we should move forward, because we do have this 3A that it's hard to describe what that does, but it certainly should focus the mind on how we want to see Hamilton evolve over time. And this is not a short-term thing. It's got a much longer horizon for the town. So, Bill, your thoughts on this?
If I felt that the revitalization, let's call it, of Hamilton's downtown was being constrained by a series of areas which you could identify with this kind of study, and that form-based zoning would, eliminate these constraints and allow all sorts of, flourishing of 1,000 developments downtown, then I would certainly support this. But my own view is that the town's history, its constraints on infrastructure, the fact that there's, in comparison to Littleton, absolutely nothing charming about this. There's no town center. I mean, it's just, I feel there's so many strikes against it that I'm not at all convinced that this RFP would produce a, very interesting piece of law that would sit on a shelf and wouldn't make any difference. And so I guess my view would be before the town spends $150,000 to do this, it should have some indication that this would make a difference. And I'm not quite sure what it would take to say this will make a difference, it won't make a difference. And I don't mean it'll make a difference, next year developers will be knocking on our door, but 10 years from now, the place will look demonstrably better and different because we had form-based zoning, as opposed to saying, nah, we're just kind of a doomed little train stop on the way between Boston and Newburyport, that there's going to be just such a hard, mountain to climb, and form-based zoning probably isn't going to make any difference. And it's a terribly pessimistic view, but there's no tourism demand here. The retail is just in a basket case. The rents are so low they can't. It's just, I'm just not convinced that, you know, the most creative and wonderful zoning code in the world would make a difference. So I'm not saying no or yes. I'm saying I wish there was something we could do for $10,000 that somebody would walk in and say, oh, this is a diamond in the rough. If you just get zoning, you know, you just get your form-based zoning, it'll make all the difference. So say, all right, here's the check. Let's go do it. But that's where I'm struggling.
I think we know where Emil stands.
Yeah, let me just make one sentence. I think this is the most important thing Hamilton is going to do for the next 25, 30 years, if they do this right. And this is such a major step for the community and a huge potential. And and it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a long time, but to get all fully developed. But I don't know how you can argue against planning. Towns fail usually not because of too much planning, but not enough planning, I think. And so I think this is the right thing, and the most important thing this town should be doing. I think this dwarfs Gordon Conwell.
Right, and I happen to agree with Emil, and I think we do have to consider, it may not happen, but if the Winthrop school site does become available, well then, even if it doesn't become a mixed-use development, even if it were just residential development, that increased number of people in town could demand services that don't exist now. I mean, there could be additional restaurants or other businesses to supply an increase in housing.
I mean, that's certainly that's a possibility, that the commercial development is limited because there are no people to spend their money in downtown. But you do have the problem of infrastructure. You don't have to build 750 units, but if you try to build 250, I don't know where it's all going to go.
Well, I don't think that number would ever happen, but you know, there are some businesses in Hamilton that are thriving. I mean, Crosby's does a tremendous business, and so, you know, there are.
They actually don't.
They think horribly.
Crosby's is not a happy camper. The shelves are, you see business, but lots of things are out of date. The stocking is slow. They're more expensive than Whole Foods. There are all sorts of signs that you know, Crosby's is not really thriving in the way that you would think.
Well,
I just toss that out.
yeah, well,
Okay.
all right, yeah,
Maybe these are all things we should discuss. I don't know.
right. Beth, what's your view?
I am happy to continue to explore. I think what I'm hearing, and I would agree with, is we need to build a case about why we're moving forward with this, not just for us.
But for the town.
For the town, because if we want any of this, I mean, I think it's good stewardship, and I understand what Bill's saying about spending money. And I know we've talked about this before, there's a lot of things the town spends money on, and then there's not a lot that's done with it. I understand this may be different, so I don't want to just throw it in with that, but I also think if we build a case and do it well from the ground up, then we can justify it to the town.
Right.
And I
Rick?
think that makes sense.
Yes.
Matt?
Yeah, I agree with the concept. I think it makes sense to.
Okay, so let's keep working. And I think to Pat's point and Beth's point, we need to do some more work on this. And Rick, I mean, if you have an RFP for the Togorth companies that might inform this at all, you can tell me.
Well, yeah, but that's the end. That's the template, that's the RFP request template. So that's a boilerplate.
That's just boilerplate, okay.
Boilerplate.
But Patrick, if you have anything that would help us inform this, or can even get anything, any RFP for a form-based code, did they do one in Rockport? Did they do a form-based code in Rockport?
They did, yes.
It's sort of a hybrid code.
It's a hybrid. I haven't seen their,
Oh, okay.
any of their documentation here, but. they did complete it.
But the more information we can, that would inform this. So we'll keep working on this. So let's, given the time here, I want to close out as quickly as we can with our remaining items on our agenda. So did everyone have an opportunity to look at the annual report? And if so, Patrick, do we have to vote to approve that annual report, or can we just say thank you for your efforts in giving us the first draft and you're good to go?
Be perfectly fine.
Did anyone have any suggestions or changes to the annual report?
I think you could consider that the consent agenda.
I thought it was very concise and very well written. I think we should just approve it.
Yeah. Do we have to
I
vote
make a
on
motion
it?
that I make a motion that we approve the 2023 annual report.
Second.
Pat?
Pat Norton, aye.
Jonathan?
Jonathan Poor Eye.
Bill?
Bill Wheaton, aye?
Emil?
Emil Delaquist, aye.
Beth?
Aye.
Rick?
Aye.
And Marnie, aye. And Matt, thank you for your editorial efforts. I also wanted to talk about a representative to the CPC, and I got discombobulated here. I actually had their meeting schedule, which I've now,
I think they meet
once a month.
And sometimes they double up, preceding the period where they make the decisions on which projects that have come forward that they want to grant.
Right, so the deadline for an eligibility application is January 4th, 2024. So their next meeting is December 14th. They meet on Thursdays, apparently. And then, so Thursday, December 14th, and then Thursday, January 11th. Would anyone like to volunteer to be a representative to the CPC?
Did town council say that an associate member, I feel like I recall this. an associate
Yes,
member
you weren't.
ought to do it.
Yeah, an associate member can't be a representative. So that, I guess, leaves me to be the representative. But I do note that Beth and Matt have agreed to take some considerably more responsibility for trying to get our minutes organized, and that is a big, I won't say a huge job, but it does require constant monitoring. I know it's really just a headache for Patrick, and if we can keep on top of this better, I think it'll make all our lives simpler. And so if you get us all squared away as to where we are, do we have someone who's now doing all our minutes on a regular basis going forward?
We have 3 different individuals who are working on them as their schedules allow.
So we should be able to move forward and not get behind, is that?
Yeah,
Okay. It's just digging that.
It's digging out that's the issue.
that's right.
Yeah, so if we can, figure out where we are and what hole we're in, at least we're covered going forward. We have to make sure we, cover the deficiencies from the past. So if you keep us abreast of that and work on that, that would be great. And then the final item I want to bring up is the stormwater management regs. And so, Pat, I don't know if you want to try and reach out to Alex Weshert and see if, well, I'm assuming you're going to be willing to shepherd the regulations since you did such a good job with the bylaw.
Yeah, I know, I've already started a little bit, but
Yeah,
I guess
yeah.
I'm curious, so that, we'd like to dovetail those to be live around the same time, which is April, is it? Or like, when are we talking about that being?
Well, that's, so the bylaw went to the AG, and it's about 2 months? We're thinking that it takes the Attorney General to review the bylaws 2 or 3 months?
It can go up to to 90 days, but typically it's 60.
So, yeah, there's, I can't say it's critical that you get going, but I don't think there's as wide a open window as April.
No, yeah, it sounds like the end of the year.
Regulations aren't subject to town meeting vote.
Right,
The
that,
planning
it just
board
public
has the
notice.
ability to do that, so,
Yeah.
we can move that forward as.
It's just
as
they
the
talk,
board wants.
they kind of talk to each other, so it's
Yeah, it's just, it's really up
nice to
to,
go live when
Yeah.
they're both going live, I guess.
Sure.
But have it ready, I suppose.
it's up to you and Alex.
I'll talk to Alex about the timing.
You
of
know,
it.
about the timing. And I know you mentioned you wanted to draft some forms that will really expedite the whole review process, so
right.
that would be good.
Yeah, standardize the submissions.
Yeah. So maybe at our next meeting, you can report on what he has to say and,
Yeah.
what's feasible in terms of your time.
Marnie, I have a question. We've listened to Gordon Theological Seminary present their comments. What do you envision as the next step in terms of the planning board digesting those and responding?
Right. So what I was hoping to do was to, after listening to them, and I've reviewed everything that they've done.
Oh, I'm sure you have.
I want to set up a framework so that we can evaluate, the substantive aspects of what they're proposing. And obviously, the first one is, our first vote when we started with Gordon Conwell was to eliminate the underlying zoning district. And what flowed from that, if you recall, is that John Witten said that because of that, we were required to have at least one as of right use. So that to me, well, there are two things that I'm thinking that are the initial discussion points. And one is the yield analysis, what they can build on that site if they are bound by the underlying zoning.
Right.
And the second thing is, what is our position with respect to their, I don't know if they're married to this and if it's a breaking point with them, but their indication that they want to retain the underlying zoning.
They want what?
To retain the underlying zoning.
Oh, yeah.
So that's our first discussion point. Do we reconsider our vote, or?
Madam Chair, I would urge that we not start that discussion
Right.
right
So
now, that
I'm
we
just
create a
saying-
framework
Want
to.
to know what
yeah.
happens next.
No, so next is the framework, and so when I get that, organized, we can move forward with that, and I think we need to have the board have its own internal discussion before we invite a lot of other voices.
Oh, yeah, I think there's going to be extensive internal discussion.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's where we are.
In a similar vein, if you don't mind, I'd like to circle back around to the RFP process. And same question, kind of what's next? And I have a thought for maybe some homework for the planning board to do, which would be very, very simply think of kind of your highest hopes and worst fears around the RFP process, and just kind of think about that, come back in, and that could be a starting point for a discussion around a fuller set of goals here.
And the other thing I think that we should look at is your 2015 economic study.
Right. You said that's on the HDC website?
Yeah, I don't think that's going to inform the discussion significantly, but it's worth taking a look at.
I think we already have a couple highest hopes and worst fears on the table, and we just need some more, and I think we can have a really pretty full and round discussion and come up with some criteria. But I would just urge that we have some sort of a framework for that discussion as well. That's all.
Right.
Can I also ask about our next meetings? You can see this one was not well attended, being a Thanksgiving week holiday. We have 2 attendees in addition to ourselves. So there's 2 meetings planned for December, is that correct?
The 5th and the 19th.
I propose that we would eliminate the meeting on December 19th.
No Christmas party, Pat?
That is allowing for Christmas parties. Just being, I know there's many other towns that only meet once, and we have, I know a lot on our plate, but I would propose that we meet once in December, since we did meet twice this month, and you can see what happens as you get
Is that a
close to the
motion?
holiday. I was making a motion,
I'm
yes,
gonna
to
second
eliminate
that.
the December 19th planning board hearing.
I was thinking the same thing.
Okay, let's vote on it.
Let's vote.
Pat Norton, aye. Well, you seconded, yeah. Pat
Yeah.
Norton, aye.
So, before we vote, there should be some discussion.
Yeah, let's
let's
do
do
some
discussion.
discussion, because really, we have a lot on our plate.
And we have another 800-pound gorilla coming at us too, the turf field.
That is an 800-pound gorilla. Do we have a peer reviewer for that?
We can get one if you'd like.
And what's the criteria of that review? What's our task?
It is a site plan review, also includes a stormwater management permit.
And with site plan review, do you get into,
Traffic, lighting.
so environmental
Lighting,
could be the
sound.
materials? Okay,
PFAS, yeah.
yep, okay.
But they would have already missed the submission deadline, I imagine, for a site plan. We're not proposing that we review that on December 19th, I imagine.
I left that open,
Yeah.
because
Well-
it will have to be advertised 2 weeks.
Patrick, is the appeal by Tobacco Partners on hold while they make the Pell application? In other words, they have two irons in the fire here, and they're just going to see what comes through?
Yeah, I'd rather not get into it, other than that, they're both concurrent.
Okay.
They continue.
Yeah,
on
the
their-
stay is expired, so, I looked at that. There's a stormwater management application along with those athletic fields.
Right.
And I looked through that document, and I went to print it out, and boy, what a mess.
And have copies if people want
Right.
paper.
But I looked at what was presented to us, and I said, there's no way that I'm competent to opine on the sufficiency of what's in front of me. And I doubt there's anyone at this table, except maybe Pat Norton, who could either. I mean, it was very,
And it's
engineered.
multifaceted.
Absolutely.
I mean, the chemical issues, there's
yes.
all sorts of.
But you can't get into that. That's just a morass that you'll never get out of,
What?
the chemical issues.
Yeah, there's the NIPD's, the SWIP stuff that, is more so the focus of what our stormwater management bylaws focus is, not the PFAS.
Well, at any rate,
Can I make a suggestion?
yes.
If we do meet on the 19th, that the agenda be on one topic or two topics?
well, we haven't finished our vote.
Well,
So,
we were doing discussion.
oh, that's right.
Right,
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
so that we,
The meeting would be shorter, is that what you're thinking? or just
would be
more
focused on one topic rather than 4 or 5
Multiple.
topics.
Yeah, well, we always sometimes get blindsided by A&Rs and that kind of stuff.
No, I get it.
Or
but-
fire alarms.
I
Yeah.
would support Rick's impulse in that sense, and I would also support there being framework for whatever the agenda is.
Right. Okay, so for the 19th, it may be that our agenda should be the RFP? Because if we,
Well, if I could opine, I'd like to focus it on Gordon, because we have a town meeting coming in, end of April, May. And we're gonna be into January, February, March, April, May. It's gonna come like that. So we need to make some serious decisions about what we're gonna do with that. And the RFP isn't gonna go anywhere until the town appropriates the money to have that happen. And so that's still floating some, that's going to be a couple of months away at least, before they make a determination. So that's my opinion.
Okay.
Yeah, I would support that, because the RFP is going to take a little time to
Right, okay.
get to the next level.
Right, and we'll be in executive session on December 5th, and so we should keep our agenda short.
Yeah.
Very few things, because that executive session could be lengthy. So we've had our discussion, so how are we voting here?
We have a motion, what was the original
To
motion?
cancel the December 19th.
Okay.
So, just let me say this. If we cancel the December 19th meeting and our agenda gets really packed for January, we might have to have 3 meetings in 1 month if we have only 1 in December. Just saying. So let's vote, okay?
I
Be
just see-
careful what you wish for, that's what I'm saying.
I see some of the agenda items being somewhat self-imposed, so I would still suggest we cancel the December 19th.
Okay, so-
Again, given also the fact that we're going to get very little to zero public participation in those meetings.
Right.
True,
People have Christmas shopping to do and
right, especially the 9th.
holidays to prepare for.
Okay, can we take a vote?
We're taking a vote. So,
So I vote to cancel it.
I vote to keep it.
Bill?
I vote to scratch it.
I vote to keep it.
I vote to keep it.
I'm voting aye, which is in favor of canceling.
And I vote to keep it.
Okay, wait, I have to count this up now.
That's 4.
It was like the most
Yeah,
contentious
4 to
vote we've
3.
had.
4 to 3.
That
We
wins the
keep
Cal
it.
Award.
We keep it, but here's the thing, we'll have a quorum even if you don't show up.
Yeah.
I'll be there.
Good try, Pat.
Thanks.
We'll try and have 1 agenda item. But if it's Gordon Conwell, it might not be short. I'll try and make the framework very
No,
focused.
I missed my turkey pickup
Actually,
today
it
at
could
Tender
be
Crop,
short.
so.
It could be short, because quite frankly, I think there's a real serious decision this board needs to make about what it wants to do, if anything, with this.
Yeah.
And again, with framework, it will speed things along.
Yes, yes.
And consider giving yourselves the option of having a Zoom meeting remotely. when they-
I would really promote the Gordon Conwell discussion be in person.
Yeah, me too.
I would, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Because,
It's nuanced.
It's nuanced. Okay, next motion.
Adjourn?
Yes,
Second?
Signatures.
Pat
Right.
Norton.
You got to use that.
oh, I have to use it,
to end
okay.
the meeting.
So, our votes to adjourn. Pat Norton,
Aye.
Jonathan Poor,
Aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Weeden, aye?
Emil Dahlquist,
Aye.
Beth Herr,
Aye.
Rick Mitchell,
Aye.
Marty Crouch, aye. We're adjourned.